There are some people in this world who carry dreams inside them like hidden treasures. They don't talk about these dreams. They don't share them with friends or family. They just hold them close, afraid that if they speak them out loud, someone might laugh. Someone might tell them they're being foolish. And so these dreams stay buried, year after year, growing quieter, but never truly dying. This is the story of one such man. His name was Raymond, and he worked at a warehouse on the edge of a small town. He was 43 years old, with hands roughened by years of lifting boxes and shoulders that had grown tired from carrying heavy loads. Every morning, he woke up at 5, made himself a simple breakfast, and caught the early bus to work. Every evening, he came home to a small apartment where he lived alone. His life had fallen into a pattern, the kind of routine that makes days blur together until you can't remember if it's Tuesday or Thursday. But here's the thing about Raymond that nobody knew. Not his coworkers. Not his neighbors. Not even his own mother, who lived in a care home 20 minutes away and whom he visited every Sunday without fail. Raymond could sing, not just hum along to the radio or mumble words in the shower. No. When Raymond sang, something happened. His voice had a quality to it that was hard to describe. It wasn't trained or polished like those singers you see on television competitions. It was raw. It was honest. It came from somewhere deep inside him, from a place where all his joys and sorrows had collected over the years like rainwater in a well. He discovered this gift when he was just a boy. His father used to sing old songs while working in their backyard garden, and young Raymond would join him, their voices mixing together in the warm summer air. Those were the happiest moments of his childhood. His father would smile at him, that proud smile that said more than any words could, and Raymond felt like he was exactly where he belonged. But life has a way of pushing dreams aside. His father passed away when Raymond was 19, taken too soon by an illness that moved faster than anyone expected. After that, singing felt different. Every melody reminded him of what he had lost. So he stopped. He told himself that singing was just a childhood thing, something to leave behind like old toys and school notebooks. Years went by. Raymond got jobs, lost jobs, got new ones. He dated a woman for 3 years in his late 20s. But it didn't work out. She wanted someone more ambitious, someone with bigger plans. He didn't blame her. He wasn't sure what his plans were either. He just kept moving forward, one day at a time. Because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do. The warehouse job came along when he was 35. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. His supervisor was fair. His coworkers were decent enough. And the pay covered his bills with a little left over each month for his mother's care home expenses. He became known as the quiet one, the guy who showed up on time, did his work without complaining, and went home without making a fuss. Most people barely noticed him. He was like furniture in the break room, always there but never really seen. But at night, alone in his apartment, Raymond still sang. He would close all the windows, turn off the television, and let the music come. Sometimes he sang the old songs his father loved. Sometimes he sang newer ones he'd heard on the radio. And sometimes, late at night when sleep wouldn't come, he made up his own melodies, songs about loneliness and hope, and all the things he could never say out loud. In those moments, he wasn't the invisible warehouse worker. He was someone else entirely, someone who mattered, someone whose voice could fill a room and maybe, just maybe, touch another person's heart. He never told anyone about this. Who would he tell? His coworkers talked about sports and weekend plans. His mother's memory had started fading, and their conversations now circled around simple things like the weather and what she had for lunch. Raymond had no close friends. No one who might understand why a middle-aged man still dreamed of standing on a stage somewhere, singing for people who actually wanted to listen. So the dream stayed hidden. Like a bird in a cage, it sat there, waiting. Then, one ordinary Wednesday afternoon, everything changed. Raymond was eating his lunch in the break room when his supervisor walked in with a stack of colorful flyers. She pinned one to the bulletin board and announced that the company was organizing a talent show. All the money raised would go to a local charity that helped families in need. Anyone could sign up. Singers, dancers, comedians, magicians, Whatever talent you had, there was a spot for you. A few of the younger workers got excited immediately. One guy could play guitar. Another claimed he could do impressive card tricks. A group of women from the packing department started whispering about doing some kind of dance routine. Raymond sat quietly in the corner, his sandwich suddenly tasteless in his mouth. His heart had started beating faster, and there was a strange feeling in his chest. It was fear. Yes, but mixed with something else. Something that felt almost like hope. The sign-up sheet was posted right next to the flyer. Over the next few days, Raymond watched as names filled the page. He walked past it every morning and every afternoon, glancing at it quickly like someone looking at something forbidden. Each time, he told himself the same thing. Don't be stupid. You're too old for this. People will laugh at you. What do you think is going to happen? That you'll sing some song and suddenly your whole life will change? That's not how the real world works. But the dream wouldn't leave him alone. It had been quiet for so long, patient for so many years. Now it was waking up, stretching its wings, pressing against the walls of its cage. On Friday evening, Raymond stayed late at work. The warehouse was nearly empty. Just a few people finishing up the last shipments. He walked to the bulletin board and stood in front of the sign-up sheet for a long time. His hand was shaking slightly as he reached into his pocket for a pen. He thought about his father. He thought about all the songs he had sung alone in his apartment, with no one to hear them. He thought about what it might feel like to finally let that voice out, to share it with other people, even if those people were just his co-workers who didn't really know him at all. And then, before he could talk himself out of it, Raymond wrote his name on the list. His handwriting looked unsteady on the paper. He stared at it for a moment, half expecting someone to appear and tell him this was a mistake. But no one came. The warehouse was quiet. Outside the windows, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Raymond didn't know it then, standing alone in that empty hallway. But he had just taken the first step toward something that would change his life forever. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The doubt, the ridicule, the moment when everything he had kept hidden would finally come into the light. All he knew was that for the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. He felt alive. News travels fast in a workplace. It doesn't matter how big or small the building is. People talk. They share things during coffee breaks and lunch hours. They whisper in hallways and exchange glances across rooms. And by Monday morning, everyone at the warehouse knew that Raymond had signed up for the talent show. At first, there was just confusion. People looked at each other with raised eyebrows and puzzled expressions. Raymond? The quiet guy from the shipping department? The one who never spoke unless spoken to? The one who ate his lunch alone in the corner of the break room every single day? That Raymond was going to perform? Nobody could quite believe it. Some people even went to check the sign-up sheet themselves, just to make sure it wasn't some kind of joke or a different Raymond altogether. But there it was, written in slightly shaky handwriting, his name among all the others. And then the whispers began. It started small, the way these things always do. A comment here, a chuckle there. Two young guys from the loading dock were standing by the vending machine when Raymond walked past them on his way to clock in. "Hey, did you hear?" one of them said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "The old man thinks he's going to be a star." The other one laughed. "What's he going to do? Sing us a lullaby?" Raymond heard every word. He kept walking, his eyes fixed on the floor, pretending he hadn't noticed. His face felt hot. His stomach twisted into a tight knot. But he didn't stop. He just kept moving forward, the way he always did. Throughout the morning, it got worse. People who had never paid attention to Raymond before were suddenly very interested in him, but not in a good way. They watched him with amused smiles, like he was some kind of entertainment. A few of them made comments just loud enough for him to hear as he passed by. "I bet he can't even carry a tune. This is going to be so awkward to watch. Someone should tell him before he embarrasses himself." During his lunch break, Raymond sat in his usual spot, trying to eat his sandwich even though he had lost all appetite. A group of younger workers at a nearby table kept glancing at him and laughing. He could feel their eyes on him, He could hear bits and pieces of their conversation, words like cringe and painful floating across the room. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to become invisible again. To go back to being the guy nobody noticed. Why had he done this? What had he been thinking? He was a 43-year-old warehouse worker with no experience, no training, nothing to prove he could actually perform in front of people. He had let a foolish dream cloud his judgment, and now he was paying the price. That afternoon, his supervisor called him into her small office near the back of the warehouse. She was a kind woman in her 50s, someone who had always treated Raymond fairly. He respected her, and he could tell she meant well as she gestured for him to sit down. "I saw your name on the talent show list," she said, her voice gentle. "I didn't know you were interested in that sort of thing." Raymond nodded, not sure what to say. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Look, I think it's wonderful that you want to participate. Really, I do. But I also want to make sure you've thought this through." She leaned forward slightly. Performing in front of people can be tough. Some folks get nervous. Stage fright is a real thing. And honestly, if you're having second thoughts, there's no shame in stepping back. Raymond felt something sink in his chest. Even she didn't believe in him. Even this woman who had always been kind was sitting here, gently suggesting that maybe he should quit before he started. "We could use help with the setup," she continued. "Moving chairs, setting up the stage, that kind of thing. It's important work. You'd still be part of the event, just in a different way." She smiled at him. That pitying smile people give when they're trying to be nice, while also saying, "You're not good enough." Raymond had seen that smile before. Many times throughout his life, from teachers who thought he wouldn't amount to much, from the woman who left him because he didn't have enough ambition, from strangers who looked right through him like he wasn't even there. He thanked his supervisor and left her office without giving her an answer. That night, Raymond sat alone in his apartment, staring at the wall. The television was off. The lights were dim. Outside his window, the city hummed with the sounds of traffic and distant voices. But inside, everything was quiet. He thought about crossing his name off the list. It would be so easy. He could go in early tomorrow, before anyone else arrived, and just erase himself from the sign-up sheet. No one would blame him. In fact, people would probably be relieved. They wouldn't have to sit through his performance. They wouldn't have to pretend to clap politely while cringing inside. Maybe his supervisor was right. Maybe some dreams were meant to stay dreams. Maybe there was a reason he had kept his singing hidden all these years. Maybe the universe was trying to tell him something, and he had been too stubborn to listen. Raymond walked to his window and looked out at the night sky. The stars were barely visible through the city lights, just faint dots scattered across the darkness. He thought about his father, the way he used to sing without caring who was listening. His father had never performed on a stage either. He had just sung because it made him happy, because the music was inside him and it needed to come out. What would his father say if he could see him now? Would he tell Raymond to quit? To play it safe? To go back to being invisible? Or would he tell him to be brave? Raymond closed his eyes and remembered something his father had told him once, a long time ago. They had been working in the garden together, pulling weeds under the summer sun, and his father had stopped to wipe the sweat from his forehead. "You know what the hardest thing in life is?" his father had asked. "It's not failure. Failure you can recover from. The hardest thing is wondering what might have been, living with the question you were too scared to answer." Raymond had been too young to fully understand those words back then. But now, standing in his dim apartment with doubt pressing down on his shoulders, they made perfect sense. If he quit now, he would never know. He would spend the rest of his life wondering if he could have done it. The ridicule would stop. Yes. The whispers would fade, but the question would remain, eating at him slowly like rust on metal. Was he really going to let other people's laughter decide his future? Raymond opened his eyes. He looked at his reflection in the dark window, at this tired man with graying hair and worried eyes, and somewhere deep inside him, in that place where his music lived, he felt something shift. He wasn't going to quit. Let them laugh. Let them whisper and roll their eyes. Let them expect him to fail. He had been invisible his whole life, And what had that gotten him? An empty apartment and a heart full of songs no one had ever heard. Maybe he would embarrass himself. Maybe he would freeze on stage and forget every word. Maybe it would be the most humiliating night of his life. But at least he would know. At least he would have tried. Raymond turned away from the window and sat down on his bed. Tomorrow would be another day of sideways glances and cruel jokes. But he would face it. He would hold his head up and keep moving forward. Because some dreams are worth fighting for. Even when the whole world thinks you're foolish for believing in them. The week before the talent show felt like the longest week of Raymond's life. Every day stretched out endlessly, filled with nervous anticipation and quiet dread. He went through the motions of his regular routine. Waking up early. Catching the bus. Working his shift. Coming home, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. It was focused on one thing, and one thing only. The song. He had to choose the right song. This wasn't just about showing people he could sing. This was about showing them something real. Something that mattered. If he was going to stand up on that stage and face all those doubtful eyes, he needed to sing something that came from his heart. Something that meant everything to him. For days, he went through possibilities in his head. Popular songs from the radio, classic hits that everyone knew. Upbeat numbers that might get people clapping along. But none of them felt right. They were just songs, words, and melodies that belonged to someone else. He needed something more personal than that. And then, one evening while he was washing dishes in his small kitchen, it came to him. There was a song his father used to sing. An old song. Not famous or well-known. Just a simple melody about holding on through hard times. His father had learned it from his own father, passed down through generations like a family heirloom. Raymond remembered sitting on the back porch as a child, listening to his father's voice carry that song into the summer air. It was the soundtrack of his happiest memories. He hadn't sung that song in over 20 years. After his father died, it had felt too painful. Every note reminded him of what he had lost. But now, standing in his kitchen with soapy water dripping from his hands, Raymond realized that this was the song he needed to sing. Not despite the pain, but because of it. This song held everything he had ever felt. Love, loss, hope, the quiet courage to keep going when life gets hard. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it with his father's song. Raymond began practicing in secret. He couldn't rehearse at home during normal hours because the walls of his apartment were thin and his neighbors might hear. So, he found other places. He sang in his car during his lunch breaks, parked in the far corner of the warehouse lot where no one could see him. He sang in the shower late at night, keeping his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry through the pipes. He sang on his walks home from the bus stop, when the streets were empty and the only audience was the moon. At first, his voice felt rusty. It cracked on the high notes and wavered on the long ones. Years of silence had taken their toll. But slowly, night after night, it started coming back. The strength returned to his lungs. The steadiness returned to his throat. And with it came something else. Something harder to name. A feeling of connection. Like he was reaching across time to touch his father's hand one more time. The days passed. The talent show grew closer. And through it all, the whispers at work continued. Raymond tried to ignore them. He kept his head down and focused on his job. But it wasn't easy. People had started placing bets on how long he would last on stage before freezing up. Someone had made a joke about bringing earplugs. Every laugh felt like a small cut, and by the end of each day, Raymond was covered in invisible wounds. But he didn't quit. Every time he thought about backing out, he remembered his father's words. The hardest thing in life is wondering what might have been. He had made his choice. Now he had to see it through. The night of the talent show arrived faster than Raymond expected. One moment he was counting down the days, and the next he was standing in the warehouse parking lot, staring at the community center across the street, where the event would be held. The building was lit up with colorful lights. People were streaming through the front doors, families and co-workers and strangers, all coming to watch the show. Raymond's hands were trembling as he walked inside. The community center had been transformed for the evening. Rows of chairs filled the main hall, facing a small stage at the front. A simple sound system had been set up, along with a microphone stand and a few spotlights. It wasn't fancy, but to Raymond, it might as well have been a grand theater. His heart was pounding so hard, he could feel it in his ears. He found his way backstage, where the other performers were gathered. There were about 15 acts in total. A young woman was stretching her legs, preparing for a dance routine. Two guys from the maintenance department were tuning their guitars. A group of women from the front office were practicing harmonies in the corner. Everyone seemed confident, excited even. They chatted and laughed and wished each other luck. Nobody talked to Raymond. He stood alone near the back wall, watching the others and trying to remember how to breathe. His mouth felt dry. His legs felt weak. The song he had practiced so many times was suddenly slipping away from his memory, the words scattering like leaves in the wind. What was he doing here? These people had experience. They had talent. They belonged on that stage. He was just a warehouse worker who sang to himself in an empty apartment. He had no business being here, no business at all. The show began. One by one, the acts were called to perform. Raymond watched through a gap in the backstage curtain as his co-workers took the spotlight. The guitarists played a rock song that got people nodding along. The dance routine earned enthusiastic applause. A comedian from accounting told jokes that had the audience laughing out loud. With each performance, Raymond's turn grew closer, and with each passing minute, his fear grew stronger. He could hear the audience out there. Hundreds of people. Co-workers who had whispered about him. Managers who had never learned his name. Their families and friends, strangers who would watch him fail. They were all waiting, filling the seats, expecting to be entertained. And soon, very soon, he would have to walk out there and face them. Raymond closed his eyes and tried to calm himself. He thought about his father. He thought about the song. He thought about all those nights alone in his apartment, singing to no one, dreaming of a moment exactly like this one. He had wanted this. He had chosen this. Now, he had to be brave enough to see it through. The comedian finished his set to loud applause. The host walked back onto the stage, holding a microphone and smiling at the crowd. All right, folks. Let's keep the energy going. Our next performer is someone you might recognize from the shipping department. Please welcome to the stage, Raymond. There was a smattering of applause, mixed with a few chuckles. Someone in the back made a comment that Raymond couldn't quite hear but could easily imagine. His feet felt frozen to the floor. His body refused to move. But then, something strange happened. A memory flashed through his mind. His father's face, smiling at him across the garden. His father's voice, singing that old familiar song. And his father's words, echoing through the years. The hardest thing is wondering what might have been. Raymond took a deep breath. He stepped forward. He pushed through the curtain and walked onto the stage. The spotlight hit him like a wave of heat. It was blinding, overwhelming, turning the audience into a sea of shadows. He couldn't see individual faces anymore. Just dark shapes filling row after row. The microphone stand waited for him at the center of the stage, looking somehow both inviting and terrifying. His legs carried him forward, one step at a time. The walk felt endless, like moving through water. When he finally reached the microphone, he gripped the stand with both hands to stop them from shaking. The room went quiet. Everyone was watching, waiting. Raymond opened his mouth to sing, and nothing came out. His mind went blank. The words were gone. The melody had vanished. He stood there in the spotlight, frozen, silent, while hundreds of eyes stared at him with a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. This was it. This was the moment everyone had expected. The moment he would fail. The silence stretched on. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. To Raymond, it felt like hours. He could hear his own heartbeat, thundering in his ears. He could feel the sweat forming on his forehead, rolling down his temples. The microphone stood in front of him like a judge waiting for a verdict. Somewhere in the audience, someone coughed. Another person shifted in their seat, the chair creaking loudly in the quiet room. Raymond caught the sound of a whispered comment, followed by a soft laugh. They were waiting for him to fail. They were already preparing their jokes for tomorrow, their stories about the warehouse worker who thought he could sing but couldn't even open his mouth. His grip tightened on the microphone stand. His knuckles turned white. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to run, to walk off that stage, push through the backstage curtain, and disappear into the night. Nobody would blame him. They had expected this all along. But then, in the middle of all that panic and fear, something unexpected happened. Raymond thought of his father. Not just a passing memory, but a vivid image that filled his entire mind. His father standing in the backyard, dirt on his knees from working in the garden, looking up at the sky while he sang. His father didn't care who was listening. He didn't sing for applause or recognition. He sang because the music was inside him and it needed to come out. He sang because it was who he was. And in that moment, Raymond understood something he had never fully grasped before. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He wasn't here to prove the doubters wrong. He was here because he had carried a song inside him for 43 years, and it was finally time to let it out. He closed his eyes. He took a slow, deep breath, and instead of thinking about the audience, instead of worrying about their judgment, he thought about his father. He imagined they were back in that garden together, just the two of them, with the summer sun warm on their faces and nowhere else to be. And then Raymond began to sing. The first note came out soft, almost fragile, like a small bird taking flight for the first time. It wavered slightly, uncertain of its own strength. But it was there. It was real, and it hung in the air, delicate and true. The second note was stronger, and the third stronger still. With each passing moment, Raymond's voice grew more confident. The words of his father's song came flowing back to him, not from his memory, but from somewhere deeper, from his heart, from his soul, from every lonely night he had spent singing alone, waiting for a moment exactly like this one. The song was about holding on, about finding light in darkness, about the strength it takes to keep walking forward when the road gets hard and the world tells you to give up. Raymond's father used to say that the song wasn't about pretending life was easy. It was about admitting that life was hard and choosing to face it anyway. As Raymond sang, something began to change in the room. The whispers stopped. The shifting and coughing faded away. People who had been smirking were now sitting very still, their expressions slowly transforming. A woman in the third row leaned forward in her seat, her hand rising to press against her chest. An older man near the back removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Raymond didn't see any of this. His eyes were still closed, and he was somewhere far away from that community center stage. He was in the garden with his father. He was in his small apartment, singing to the empty walls. He was everywhere he had ever been alone with his music, and for the first time, he wasn't alone anymore. His voice filled the room. It wasn't a perfect voice. It cracked slightly on some of the high notes, and there were moments when his breath came a little short. But there was something in it that perfection could never provide. There was truth. There was pain. There was a lifetime of hidden dreams finally breaking free. One of the young men who had mocked Raymond at the vending machine was sitting near the middle of the audience. He had come to the show expecting entertainment, expecting to laugh at the quiet warehouse worker who didn't know his place. But now he sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, his eyes fixed on the stage. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't even smiling. Something in Raymond's voice had reached inside him and touched a place he didn't even know existed. The song built toward its final verse. Raymond's voice rose, carrying years of loneliness and hope and quiet courage. The words spoke of morning coming after the longest night, of finding strength you didn't know you had, of believing in yourself when no one else does. And then, as the last note left his lips, Raymond opened his eyes. For a moment, there was complete silence. The kind of silence that feels almost sacred, like the space between heartbeats. Raymond stood at the microphone, suddenly aware of where he was, suddenly seeing the hundreds of faces in front of him, But something was different. The faces weren't laughing. They weren't smirking or rolling their eyes. They were crying. Everywhere he looked, people were wiping their cheeks. Women dabbed at their eyes with tissues. Men blinked rapidly, trying to hold back emotions they hadn't expected to feel. Even the teenagers who had come with their parents, the ones glued to their phones all evening, had put their devices down and were staring at the stage with something like wonder. Then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, somewhere in the back of the room. But then another joined in. And another. And within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding so loudly that the sound seemed to shake the walls. Raymond stood there, overwhelmed, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't polite applause. This wasn't the kind of clapping people do because they're supposed to. This was real. This was genuine. These people had felt something, and they were trying to tell him that his voice had reached them. His supervisor was standing in the third row, tears streaming down her face. The same woman who had suggested he help with setup instead of performing. The same woman who had gently tried to save him from embarrassment. She was clapping harder than anyone, her hands coming together over and over. Her expression filled with something that looked like amazement. The young guys from the loading dock were on their feet too. The ones who had called him old man and joked about lullabies. They weren't laughing now. One of them had his hand pressed to his mouth, like he was trying to hold something in. The other was shaking his head slowly, as if he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The applause went on and on. It washed over Raymond like warm water, like sunlight after a long winter, like every good thing he had ever hoped for but never dared to expect. He didn't know what to do with his hands. He didn't know where to look. He just stood there, letting the moment wash over him, letting himself finally be seen. For 43 years, Raymond had been invisible. He had moved through life like a ghost, unnoticed and unremarkable. He had hidden his gift away like something shameful, something that didn't deserve the light. But now, standing on that small stage in a community center on the edge of town, he was invisible no more. He had let them hear his voice, his real voice. And it had moved them in ways he never could have imagined. Raymond felt tears sliding down his own cheeks. He wasn't sad. He wasn't overwhelmed by pressure or fear. These were different tears. These were the tears of a man who had finally stopped hiding. A man who had found the courage to share the deepest part of himself with the world. And the world, against all odds, had listened. The applause eventually faded, the way all beautiful moments must. People returned to their seats. The host came back on stage to announce the next act. The show continued, but something had shifted in that room. Something that couldn't be undone. The air itself felt different, charged with an energy that hadn't been there before. Raymond made his way off the stage on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. His whole body was trembling, not from fear this time, but from the release of something he had been holding inside for far too long. He pushed through the backstage curtain and found a quiet corner where he could lean against the wall and catch his breath. He had done it. He had actually done it. The rest of the talent show passed in a blur. Raymond stayed backstage, watching the remaining performances through the gap in the curtain but not really seeing them. His mind kept replaying what had just happened. The silence, before he sang, the first note leaving his lips, the faces in the crowd transforming from doubt to wonder, the standing ovation that had felt like a wave lifting him up and carrying him somewhere he had never been before. When the show finally ended, the host announced that donations for the charity had exceeded all expectations. People began filing out of their seats, gathering their coats and chatting with each other. Raymond knew he should leave too, slip out the back door and walk home in the quiet of the night. That's what the old Raymond would have done, disappear before anyone could corner him with questions or comments. But before he could make his escape, people started finding him. His supervisor was the first to appear backstage. She walked straight up to Raymond with tears still visible on her cheeks and didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, looking at him like she was seeing him for the very first time. "I owe you an apology," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was being kind. But I was just like everyone else. I looked at you and saw what I expected to see instead of what was really there. Raymond shook his head. You were trying to help. I understand. No, she said firmly. I was wrong. We were all wrong. She reached out and squeezed his arm gently. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Thank you for not listening to me. She walked away before Raymond could respond, leaving him standing there with a warmth spreading through his chest. More people came. Co-workers he had barely spoken to in 8 years of working at the same warehouse. They approached him one by one, some awkward and embarrassed, others openly emotional. A woman from the accounting department told him she had lost her mother last year, and that his song had felt like a message from somewhere beyond. A man from the loading dock, one of the quiet ones who never joined in the jokes, shook Raymond's hand and said simply, "That took real courage." And then came the young men, the ones who had laughed at the vending machine, the ones who had called him old man and made jokes about lullabies. They walked up to Raymond slowly, their usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like shame. The taller one spoke first. "Hey, listen. I just wanted to say." He trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck uncomfortably. "I was a jerk. We both were. What you did up there, that was something else. I don't know how you did it, honestly. I couldn't have stood up there like that. Not with everyone expecting me to fail." The other one nodded. "We thought you were going to be a joke. But you weren't the joke. We were." He looked Raymond in the eyes, something he had never done before. "I'm sorry, man. Really." Raymond could have said many things in that moment. He could have made them feel worse about their behavior. He could have reminded them of every cruel comment, every whispered insult, but looking at their faces, seeing the genuine regret written there, he felt no desire for any of that. "It's okay," he said. "I forgive you." And he meant it. He truly did. Because holding on to anger would only keep him trapped in the past, and Raymond had spent far too much of his life living there already. The walk home that night felt different from every other walk Raymond had ever taken. The streets looked the same. The buildings hadn't changed. The moon hung in the sky just as it always did, but Raymond himself was different. He walked with his head held higher. His steps felt lighter. The weight he had been carrying for so many years, the weight of feeling invisible and unimportant, had finally lifted from his shoulders. When he got home, he didn't turn on the television or sit in silence like he usually did. Instead, he went to his small closet and pulled out an old shoebox from the top shelf. Inside were photographs, letters, and other keepsakes from his childhood. He hadn't opened this box in years. He sat on his bed and looked through the memories one by one. His father, as a young man, smiling at the camera, a birthday card with his father's handwriting inside, a faded photo of the two of them in the garden, dirt on their knees, happiness on their faces. Raymond held that photo for a long time. He traced his father's face with his finger, remembering the sound of his voice, the warmth of his presence, the way he made everything feel safe. "I did it, Dad," Raymond whispered to the empty room. "I finally did it." In the weeks that followed, life went back to normal in some ways. Raymond still woke up early and caught the bus to work. He still put in his hours at the warehouse, lifting boxes and checking shipments. He still ate lunch in the break room and walked home in the evening. But other things had changed completely. People talked to him now. Not just polite nods or quick hellos, but real conversations. They asked about his weekend. They invited him to join their tables at lunch. They looked at him when they spoke, actually looked at him, like he was someone worth seeing. Raymond didn't become famous after that night. No record labels came calling. No talent scouts showed up at his door. He didn't quit his warehouse job or move to a big city to chase a music career. That wasn't what this story was ever about. What Raymond gained was something far more valuable than fame. He gained the knowledge that he was capable of more than he had ever believed. He learned that dreams don't expire, that they wait patiently inside us, ready to bloom whenever we find the courage to let them. He discovered that the biggest prisons we live in are often the ones we build for ourselves, and the only person who holds the key is the one staring back at us in the mirror. Every now and then, at company events or charity gatherings, people would ask Raymond to sing, and he did. Not for applause or recognition, but because the music was inside him and it needed to come out. Just like his father all those years ago, he started visiting his mother more often, even though her memory continued to fade. Sometimes, during those visits, he would sing to her, the old songs, his father's songs, and even though she couldn't always remember his name, something in her eyes would light up when she heard his voice. Some part of her still knew, still remembered. Raymond never forgot the lesson he learned on that small stage in a community center on the edge of town. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something matters more than the fear. It's opening your mouth to sing even when every voice in your head tells you to stay silent. And sometimes, that one act of bravery is enough to change everything. Not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. Raymond had been invisible for 43 years. But in the end, all it took was one song to finally be seen. And that made all the difference.